On the Buzz Meter this Sunday, George Stephanopoulos under fire for donating $75,000 to the Clinton Foundation and failing to disclose it to viewers or his ABC News bosses, even when conducting a skeptical interview with the author of the book ripping that very foundation. Now the anchor has apologized.
As you know, the Clinton campaign says you haven't produced a shred of evidence that there was any official action as secretary that supported the interests of donors. We've done investigative work here at ABC News, found no proof of any kind of direct action.
I should have gone the extra mile to avoid even the appearance of a conflict. I apologize to all of you for failing to do that.
How deeply has the former Clinton White House aide hurt his own credibility, especially as he covers Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign? Jeb Bush kicks up a storm by defending his brother's invasion of Iraq and ignoring the key part of Megyn Kelly's question.
On the subject of Iraq, obviously very controversial, knowing what we know now, would you have authorized the invasion?
I would have, and so would have Hillary Clinton, just to remind everybody, and so would have almost everybody that was confronted with the intelligence they got.
How did the former governor bobble that question about what we know now? And will the media keep pressing him to disavow his brother's policies? President Obama says the media need to do a better reporting job on issues like poverty to help him change the minds of Republican leaders, and takes a swipe at Fox News. Brit Hume weighs in on the president's criticism. Plus, David Letterman about to hang it up with an all-star parade of guests.
I think at one point we discussed that maybe it's easier for a man or a woman to be more effective out of office, actually, than when they're...
You're about to find out.
My God, I take that as a challenge.
How did Dave transform late-night TV? What about his liberal leanings? And can Stephen Colbert hang on to the CBS audience? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. George Stephanopoulos burst onto the national scene as a top White House and campaign advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, later joined ABC News as a liberal commentator, and by the time Hillary made her first White House run, he was interviewing her as an ABC anchor.
Looking back on the 1990s, that the Clinton administration, and you've come out against free trade agreements now, but that the Clinton administration didn't do enough to address the downside of globalization.
Now, you remember this because George did work in that '92 campaign, and George and I actually were against NAFTA. I'm talking about him in his previous life, before he was an objective journalist and doesn't have opinions about such matters.
But now, as co-anchor of Good Morning America and host of This Week, Stephanopoulos failing to disclose his $75,000 in donations to the Clinton Foundation, even as he covered the political uproar over its finances and talked about its donors on The Daily Show.
What you get is access, and you get the influence that comes with access, and that's got to shape the thinking of politicians.
He initially offered a narrow written apology, but on Friday he expanded it on GMA.
Those donations were a matter of public record, but I should have made additional disclosures on air when we covered the foundation. And I now believe that directing personal donations to that foundation was a mistake.
Stephanopoulos repeating that apology on This Week on this Sunday. Joining us now, Nina Easton, senior editor at Fortune and a Fox News contributor. Mercedes Schlapp, a columnist for U.S. News, political consultant, and a former Bush White House official. And Dana Milbank, columnist for The Washington Post. Nina, how severe a blow is this to George Stephanopoulos and his credibility?
It's an incredibly severe blow, and I think what makes this especially egregious, it wasn't like he was, say, doing an interview just with Hillary Clinton. He was doing reporting on the foundation that he had given $75,000 to. He was calling Peter Schweitzer on his partisan ties at a time when he had partisan ties, clearly, if he's still giving money to the Clintons, or still has ties to the Clintons, and then going on with Jon Stewart and not disclosing. I mean, disclosing it, by the way, and that last thing where he apologizes, disclosing it would have completely undermined any credibility he had to even report on this story.
Right, but at least he would have disclosed it and not withheld it. Mercy, can Republicans trust George Stephanopoulos to be fair?
Well, you know, it's interesting because Senator Marco Rubio this morning on Fox with Chris Wallace basically said, you know, I've always viewed him as a fair, credible journalist. But when you're looking at, especially in the conservatives on the right, they're saying, this is questionable. I mean, you go back to the 2012. Absolutely.
Do you have confidence in him now?
No, you know, you worry about the fact that will he be able to even give Hillary Clinton a fair interview, an objective interview? You know, it makes everyone very concerned on the right. You're starting to see these stories pop up on National Review. Rush Limbaugh even talked about it, about him, that he was never a journalist in the first place. So it does impact, I think, George, especially for this particular presidential cycle where Hillary Clinton is running.
I don't think it's fair to say he's never been a journalist in the first place. I think he's worked hard in 18 years to put his partisan past behind it. This brings it up again. And, you know, he's dropped out of moderating the ABC's Republican presidential debate. The truth was that ABC was in danger of losing that debate because of this controversy. But if he can't do that, Dana Milbank, then how can he interview presidential candidates and things like that?
Well, he's created a real problem for himself, and it's just a stupid self-inflicted wound here, precisely because he's labored for 15 or more years just to get into a position where people were giving him that. I mean, I remember, you know, when he was first joining ABC, I saw him at one of these events out in Iowa, and I was joking about it. You're going to be a journalist? He didn't think it was funny at all, but and sure enough, he really proved that he could be accepted by all sides, and that's why the idea of the contribution itself discredits him, not to a campaign, but the fact that he's giving money to the foundation. The fact that a TV journalist like you, how he makes so much money they can give this much away, is a further outrage.
I'm up there in the stratosphere with Stephanopoulos. But, you know, ABC told me that he is in violation of its policies, but it's okay. It was just an honest mistake. We forgive him because he apologized. Now, by the way, Clinton Foundation does some good work around the world. Many media companies, including News Corp, the sister company of Fox News, have given major donations, but they're not George Stephanopoulos, former Clinton aide, who has this problem.
And, you know, if you wanted, he cares about AIDS in Africa. There's lots of other less
other charities.
And the other important thing, Howie, is the timing of these. The timing of these donations, 2012, 2013, 2014, as Hillary's revving up her campaign. And as he said on to Jon Stewart, if you're giving that money, are you expecting some access?
Right. But let me ask you about the way the story broke, because the conservative website Washington Free Beacon got this scoop, did the responsible thing, called ABC for comment, rather than commenting. ABC cooperated with Politico in hopes of getting a more sympathetic story. What message did that send to other news outlets about whether you just throw something up online or whether you do the right thing first and ask for comment?
Yeah, and I think they were clearly cherry-picking outlets. And again, it goes to this. It also goes to this. What Mercedes referred to as this distrust the conservative outlets and conservative commentators have had about George Stephanopoulos, and he needs to go the extra mile to have credibility, particularly covering this election.
You know, I'm not somebody who shouts liberal bias every 5 minutes, but the day that this broke, which was Thursday, there were 0 stories about this on MSNBC and 1 segment all day on CNN. If this had been the equivalent of a journalist with a conservative past, those networks would have been all over it. But my question to you is, ABC telling me George Stephanopoulos, despite bowing out of the debate, will continue to lead its 2016 campaign coverage. Isn't there a shadow over that coverage now, or will this blow over?
They're making, I think, a mistake. Primarily because Hillary Clinton will be most likely the Democratic candidate, and so I think for George, it just represents a problem when you are the lead political correspondent and really providing that objective analysis, especially in the fact when you saw that interview with Peter Schweitzer, it was very clear that his questions, it was almost like these talking points out of the Clinton campaign where even Peter felt attacked from George. So again, it really hurt him incredibly. Going back to Nina's point, you're talking 2012, 2013. They were clearly revving up for this campaign, and there was clearly the idea that the foundation was serving as a bit of a super PAC for Hillary.
You know, I've been very tough on Stephanopoulos this week. I like George. He's a savvy guy. I dealt with him when he was a White House spinner and a campaign aide in '92, and so, like you, I've watched him try to make this transition. But it's not just the fact that Hillary is the all but certain Democratic nominee. I mean, any Republican presidential candidate who goes on, it seems to me now, if he does an aggressive but fair interview, people will say, well, it's because he's in the tank for the Clintons, and if he's, you know, people watching will see him, I think, fairly or unfairly through a different lens.
Yes, and what he's going to have to do, I think, is be particularly tough on Hillary Clinton now. It's sort of like a makeup call that the ref has to do in football, and I think he's going to have to overcompensate now. So if anybody should be disappointed about the whole Stephanopoulos scandal, it's Hillary Clinton.
So you're saying he's going to have to bend over backwards.
Absolutely.
But do you think that he successfully made the transition and now has
That's why it's
himself?
so inexplicable, because I think nobody was really questioning his integrity before this. He finally made it.
Well, nobody. Mercy, was that true? People on your side was nobody?
But in the mainstream.
When I was working at the White House, it was clear that they thought, the Bush White House, it was clear that they thought that Stephanopoulos would be fair. I mean, it was kind of what Senator Marco Rubio described this morning. But with that being said, now that we've seen the link to the foundation, the interview with Schweitzer, it's all about, again, looking at what the steps that he took. It brings to light the fact that the Republicans are going to be concerned. They do not want him to be involved, obviously, not only in the debates, but really, are they going to accept an interview from him being so closely linked to the foundation?
That's the shadow I talked about. All right, let me make the turn to Jeb Bush. 4 different statements about Iraq over 4 days, all beginning with this interview with Megyn Kelly on Fox.
You don't think it was a mistake?
In retrospect, the intelligence that everybody saw, that the world saw, not just the United States, was faulty. By the way, guess who thinks that those mistakes took place as well? George W. Bush.
Your brother.
So, Dana Milbank, the former governor of Florida went from that interview to telling Sean Hannity that he had misunderstood the question, but he wouldn't answer the question because it was hypothetical, to saying it's an insult to the troops who served in Iraq to talk about it, to saying I wouldn't have invaded Iraq in 2003, and then says, yes, it was a mistake the way you handled it. The media sort of demand consistency on these things, don't they?
Yeah, well, or at least not having 5 different answers in 3 days.
You're saying 1 or 2 is okay, maybe 3?
Yeah, maybe once. I mean, the problem is he had an easy out. He could have said, as he started to say the next day, I misunderstood the question. Fine, get out of jail free, you're done. And he wouldn't do it. And I think, the irony here is he is set out saying, he's his own man and he's not going to be like his brother. And he proved it, because his brother would say one thing and stick to it. And a younger brother, Jeb, has now said 5 things in 3 days.
Is the media criticism justified here? I mean, it's been really harsh as Jeb has kind of fumbled around.
Unfortunately, Jeb Bush carries the burden of his brother and the brother's legacy. So again, I think it's been very tough on Jeb Bush, but I think a lesson for Jeb Bush is he's got to learn to listen to the questions and also not an autopilot in terms of answering these questions.
Right. That was my feeling was, whether he heard knowing what we know now, or he was so anxious to give the scripted talking point that he sort of blew past it. But the level of media criticism here is so intense that I'm wondering whether you think this has been overblown at all.
I don't, actually. And I say that while acknowledging that the media has a very short-term memory about Iraq and the fact that Democrats like Hillary Clinton supported going in, and media outlets like the New York Times contributed to it. So that said, this was a perfectly legitimate question for Megyn Kelly, for example, to be raising, and it was a perfectly legitimate reaction by the press to say, he stumbled for days before. It was not an unexpected question. You should know what you're going to say to this.
He had a year to prepare for this question, but is it, I just have a few seconds here, is it also that the press is trying to find some daylight between Jeb Bush and George W. Bush? Or hang the Bush presidency around his candidacy?
It's a reality of covering Jeb Bush is George Bush, and you just have to be ready for that if you're a so-called front-running candidate.
We're going to continue this discussion on the other side. Remember to send me a tweet. Tell us what you think about this show or the issues we're talking about here. Stephanopoulos, Jeb, at Howard Kurtz, or you can email us, mediabuzz@foxnews.com. When we come back, well, first of all, when we come back, are the media going overboard in predicting doom and gloom for Jeb? And later, Brit Hume on President Obama complaining that the media and Fox News do a lousy job of covering these issues.